The heavy iron gates of Gut Lindenhof groaned open, parting the mist that clung to the ancient oaks like the ghosts of the past, allowing the massive Schwartz Mercedes S-Klasse to crunch slowly over the wet gravel of the driveway. Maximilian von Hohenstein, a man whose heart had been encased in the same gray stone as his ancestral home since the death of his wife, gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned the color of old parchment. He had arrived 2 hours earlier than expected, driven by a strange, gnawing anxiety that had plagued him all the way from his high-rise office in München. The estate, usually a fortress of suffocating silence and rigid discipline, should have been asleep in the heavy golden light of the German late afternoon. But as the car crested the final hill, Maximilian felt his heart stop dead in his chest, a sensation akin to plunging into the icy waters of the North Sea. Lucas and Finn, his 3-year-old twins who had been immersed in a deathly, traumatic silence for months, were not in their rooms studying or napping as the strict schedule demanded. They were in the muddy grass of the front lawn. And they were running. They dropped their wooden toys with a suddenness that startled the crows from the trees and sprinted with a speed Maximilian had never seen in his children, crossing the lawn with a desperation that froze his blood. His first instinct, honed by the protective fury of a father who had already lost too much, was to scream, to run, to intercept them before they fell or hurt themselves. But his feet seemed fused to the pedals, and he could only watch through the windshield as the scene unfolded with the slow-motion clarity of a nightmare, or a miracle. What his eyes witnessed in that exact second was not an accident, nor a fall, nor a cry of pain. It was an explosion of pure, raw emotion. The two little ones threw themselves with brute force into the arms of the domestic worker, who received them on her knees on the damp ground, utterly disregarding the mud that instantly stained her pristine uniform. Maximilian von Hohenstein sat paralyzed in the safety of his armored vehicle, the engine purring silently as he watched Lena, a young woman of barely 23, wrap her arms around his children. She was wearing striking gelbe Veleda Putzhandschuhe that she hadn't yet taken off, bright flashes of canary yellow against the somber greens and grays of the estate. She didn't reject them. She didn't scold them for the dirt. On the contrary, she lowered herself completely to the ground to be at their level, opening her arms like a safe haven in a stormy sea. The children clung to her neck, burying their faces in her shoulder, and for the first time in 2 years, Maximilian heard a sound he thought he had lost forever to the cold earth of the family crypt. Laughter, a genuine, childlike, and crystalline laugh that broke the solemn silence of the enormous Gottshof, ringing out like church bells on a Sunday morning. The wind gently moved the ancient linden trees of the estate, and the golden light of the afternoon illuminated the scene, as if it were a painting by Caspar David Friedrich, full of romantic longing and emotional intensity. But Maximilian felt an icy chill run down his spine, a dissonance that made his head spin. How was this possible? That very morning, his fiancée Victoria had sent him a crying voice message, her voice trembling with what he thought was concern. She claimed that the new girl, Lena, was negligent, dirty, and even worse, psychologically abused the twins when he wasn't around. "You have to fire her today, Maximilian," Victoria had demanded, her voice breaking with theatrical sobbing. "The children are terrified of her. She leaves them alone in the dark. She is a peasant with no understanding of discipline." With that lie drilling into his mind, Maximilian had driven from the city with the fury of an overprotective father, ready to throw the young woman out onto the street without a second thought. But the scene before him shattered every word Victoria had said like glass hitting a stone floor. Lena, in her simple blue uniform with a white collar, stroked Finn's blonde hair with the back of her clean hand, avoiding the rubber of the glove, while Lucas tried to pull off one of her gelbe Veleda Putzhandschuhe, playing with complete trust, complete happiness. The disconnect between what he'd been told and what he was seeing was so jarring that Maximilian had to lean against the hot hood of the car after stepping out to keep his balance. He took a deep breath of the crisp, pine-scented air, trying to regain his ruthless businessman's composure, but his eyes couldn't tear themselves away from the girl. Lena had no idea that her boss, the owner of half the region's industrial empire and estates between München and Hamburg, was watching her from 20 meters away. She remained in her own world, focused solely on the children. Maximilian noticed details he had previously ignored in his haste and grief over his widowhood. He saw how she wiped their faces with infinite tenderness. He saw how she spoke to them softly, with a smile that lit up her tired face, a smile that didn't seek to impress anyone because she thought no one saw it. The anger with which Maximilian had arrived began to mutate into something more dangerous, something colder and more calculating. Suspicion. If Victoria had lied about this, what else had she lied about? The image of his fiancée, always immaculate in her designer clothes, always complaining about dust and the noise of the children, contrasted brutally with the image of Lena, kneeling in the grass, her apron stained with the honest dirt of the Gutshof, yet holding the entire world of those two motherless children in her embrace. Maximilian took a step back, seeking the shade of the large stone pillars at the main entrance. He didn't want to interrupt, not yet. He needed to see more. He needed to understand how a simple domestic servant, who had barely been there a month, had achieved what the best child psychologists in München and Hamburg had failed to do: bring joy back to his children. The millionaire loosened his silk tie, feeling breathless. The decision to fire her had evaporated, replaced by intense curiosity and a gnawing guilt. He had been on the verge of committing a terrible injustice, driven by the malice of another. From his makeshift hiding place behind an ivy-covered column of volcanic stone, Maximilian decided to become a spy in his own house. He would observe her every move. If Lena was truly the angel she appeared to be in that garden, then the devil was sleeping in his own bed and wearing an engagement ring. The silence on the outside veranda was absolute, broken only by the distant buzzing of insects and the laughter that drifted from the garden. Maximilian remained motionless, hidden behind the thick column, holding his breath. From this strategic position, he had a perfect, unobstructed view. He could see Lena's profile, the gentle curve of her neck as she leaned toward Lucas, and the way her hands, still gloved in that garish yellow, delicately held a small wildflower that Finn had just plucked from the ground to give her. "It's beautiful, my little shots," Lena said. Her voice reached Maximilian's ears clearly. It wasn't the voice of an employee fulfilling an obligation. It was a warm, vibrant tone, charged with genuine affection and the soft lilt of the local dialect. "Let's put it in water so it won't get thirsty." "Okay," Finn chirped. Maximilian felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. My little shots. Victoria never called them that. Victoria called them the children, your sons, or in her moments of stress, that burden. He remembered the dinner the week before when Finn had spilled kava on Victoria's silk dress. She had screamed a high-pitched, disproportionate scream that shattered the Gemütlichkeit of the evening, and the children had shrunk in fear, trembling under the heavy oak table. Maximilian had excused his fiancée, thinking she was stressed about the wedding. She has no maternal instincts, but she'll learn, he'd told himself. How blind he'd been. In the garden, the scene changed. Lena stood up, dusting her knees, but the twins wouldn't let go. They clung to her legs, preventing her from walking, turning movement into a game. Maximilian waited for the annoyed gesture, the impatient look he used to see on the previous nannies who had quit after a week. But Lena burst out laughing. "Watch out! I'm a heavy-footed giant from the Black Forest," she exclaimed, lifting her feet dramatically, walking like a funny monster while the children squealed with delight, chasing her around the stone fountain. Maximilian's mind traveled back to the past, to the days before the accident, when his wife Elena was still alive. The house used to have that energy, that vital noise. After the funeral, the Gut Lindenhof had become a mausoleum of silence and strict rules imposed largely by Victoria's gradual arrival in his life. She had insisted that the children needed discipline, Ordnung, and stillness to overcome the trauma. Maximilian, broken by grief and immersed in his business to avoid thinking, had delegated the children's upbringing, blindly trusting his new partner's judgment. Now, watching Lena clumsily run around on purpose to get caught by two 3-year-olds, Maximilian understood that the stillness Victoria demanded wasn't therapy, it was repression. Suddenly, Lucas tripped. Maximilian's heart leaped into his throat. The boy fell face first onto the grass. In any other circumstance, under Victoria's gaze, Lucas would have held back his tears for fear of being scolded for clumsiness or would have burst into hysterical sobs of loneliness. Maximilian made to come out of his hiding place but stopped. Lena was already there. She didn't run in alarm or scream in fear. She simply crouched down quickly with absolute calm. "Up we go," she said naturally, lifting him up. "Let's check the knees for battle scars." "Let's see," Lucas whispered. Lucas looked at her with his eyes filled with unshed tears, awaiting the adult's reaction. "Nothing," Lena declared with a triumphant smile, brushing the dirt off his little lederhosen. "You're made of rubber, Lucas. A rubber superhero." The boy blinked. Surprise replaced the pain, and instead of crying, he let out a nervous giggle that soon joined his brother's. Maximilian felt his legs go weak. That emotional management, that ability to transform fear into confidence in a fraction of a second, wasn't learned in any hotel management or domestic service course. It came from the soul. He looked at the watch on his wrist, 4:30 in the afternoon. According to the schedule Victoria had texted him, the children should be taking their mandatory nap at this time, and Lena should be cleaning the silverware in the basement. "She's lazy," Maximilian thought, Victoria's voice echoing in his memory. "She's always wasting time. She doesn't keep to schedules, and she leaves the house a mess." Lies. It was all lies. The house, from what he could see through the living room windows, was spotless. And the children weren't taking a forced nap. They were getting the fresh air and exercise they so desperately needed. The supposed neglect was actually absolute dedication that went far beyond her salary. It was then that Maximilian noticed something else, a detail that unsettled him while Lena played. Every now and then, she glanced toward the house, toward the master bedroom balcony, with a fleeting expression of fear, as if she were keeping watch, as if she feared someone might come out and discover her being happy with the children. Who was she afraid of? He wasn't home. The domestic staff respected her. The only person who was usually in the house at those hours supervising was Victoria. A dark revelation began to form in the millionaire's mind. The children's fear wasn't of Lena. Lena's fear wasn't of losing her job for incompetence. There was a reign of terror in place in his home, of which he had no idea. Suddenly, the sound of heels clattering on the marble floor inside the house broke the spell. Maximilian tensed. He knew those steps. They were quick, aggressive. The front door, a few feet from where he was hiding, burst open. "Lena!" The shout was shrill, dripping with venom. Victoria came out onto the terrace. She was wearing an impeccable cream-colored cocktail dress, suitable for a high society gathering in Munich, and her hair was perfectly styled, but her face was contorted with anger. She didn't see Maximilian's Schwartz Mercedes S-Klasse parked a little further away, hidden by the tall hedges, nor did she see him behind the column. She only had eyes for the maid in the garden. "I told you I want them inside," Victoria bellowed, storming down the steps. "Look at them! They're full of dirt! You're useless! If Maximilian saw you, he'd kick you out right now!" The twins, who had been laughing seconds before, froze. Their body language changed instantly. Shoulders hunched, heads down. Lucas ran to hide behind Lena's legs. Far from being intimidated, Lena placed a protective hand on the child's head and stood up straight. Despite her maid's uniform and her inferior position, at that moment, Lena seemed to have more dignity than the rich woman who was insulting her. "Frau Victoria, the children need sun," Lena tried to say in a trembling but firm voice. "They have been inside all day." "Don't answer me," Victoria shrieked, raising her hand threateningly as she moved dangerously close to them. "You're just a servant. You do as I say, and I say those brats go to their rooms right now so I can have some peace." Maximilian felt his blood boil. The woman standing there shouting wasn't the sweet fiancée who accompanied him to charity galas. She was a tyrant, and she had just made the mistake of her life, revealing her true colors while thinking she was alone. The millionaire adjusted his jacket, stepped out of the shadow of the column, and took a firm step into the light, his leather shoes clicking against the stone with the sound of a judge's gavel. The sharp, authoritarian sound made Victoria spin around. Her face paled, becoming almost waxen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes traveled from Lena to Maximilian, and pure terror filled her gaze. "Maximilian," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Liebling, You're here. You're early. Maximilian didn't look at her. His dark eyes scanned her as if she were an annoying piece of furniture and pierced her. Lena, who now stared at him in panic, clutched the children tightly, awaiting the dismissal Victoria had promised her so many times. But Maximilian didn't shout. He walked slowly toward the group on the lawn. He stopped in front of Lena, looked down at his children who stared at him in amazement, and then at the young woman's gelbe Veleda Putzhandschuhe stained with the soil from his own Gutshof. Take the children inside, Lena, Maximilian said in a voice so deep and calm it was terrifying. Wash their hands and give them whatever they want for a snack. Perhaps some kebab. Lena blinked in confusion. Yes, yes, Herr von Hohenstein. And then Maximilian slowly turned his head toward Victoria, fixing her with a look that could have cut through steel. And you, run them a bath. No one is leaving this house today, except perhaps someone who doesn't know how to behave. Victoria felt the ground open beneath her feet. Maximilian had seen. He had seen everything. And the silence of the millionaire was far more dangerous than her screams. The air in the garden had become so heavy it was hard to breathe. Lena, her heart pounding in her ribs like a trapped bird, didn't dare look back. She felt Maximilian's gaze burning into the back of her neck, but her priority, as always, was the children. She took Lucas and Finn's small hands, still trembling from Victoria's shouts, and guided them toward the service entrance with quick but gentle steps, trying to convey a calm she herself didn't feel. Come on, my brave ones, Lena whispered, swallowing her tears. Let's see who gets to the kitchen first for a glass of kebab. As the young woman and the children disappeared behind the rose bushes, a silent storm was brewing in the main garden. Victoria tried to force a smile, that rehearsed smile she used for society magazines, but her lips trembled uncontrollably. She took a step toward Maximilian, extending a manicured hand to touch him. Her arms searched for that physical connection that always saved her. Maximilian, darling, please don't look at me like that, she began, her tone oscillating between pleading and indignation. You have to understand the context. That girl is impossible. She deliberately drives me crazy. She knows I'm particular about cleanliness, Ordnung muss sein, and look at how she has your children rolling around like animals in the mud. Maximilian took a step back, avoiding her touch, as if his fiancée's hand were coated in acid. The rejection was so blatant and brutal that Victoria was left with her hand hanging in the air, humiliated. Inside, he said, it was a single word, but loaded with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding hundreds of employees. There was no tenderness, no usual affection, only a cold, curt order. Maximilian turned and walked toward the house without waiting for her. Victoria stood there for a second, her eyes filled with impotent fury, staring in the direction she had heard Lena. Damn peasant, she thought, clenching her teeth until her jaw ached. This is your fault, but you're not going to win. Tonight you'll be out on the street in your rags. She smoothed down her dress, lifted her chin, and followed her fiancé, preparing for the performance of her life. She had to convince him that she was the victim. Upon entering the mansion, the contrast was overwhelming. The marble foyer was cool and quiet. Maximilian didn't linger in the living room. He walked straight to his study, an imposing room with dark mahogany-paneled walls and shelves piled high with antique books. He opened the double doors and stepped out in waiting for Victoria to enter. She passed by him, leaving a trail of her expensive perfume, a fragrance that Maximilian had always found elegant, but which now, after smelling the fresh earth and the honesty of the garden, made his stomach churn. He closed the door with a sharp thud that echoed throughout the ground floor, isolating the study from the rest of the house. The sound was final, like a cell door closing. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Lena tried to control the trembling of her hands as she poured the kava. She knew what that meeting in the office meant. She had seen Frau Victoria's face. She was going to be fired. There was no doubt about it. She felt a sharp pang of pain, not for the salary, which she desperately needed for her mother's medicine, but for them. She looked at Lucas and Finn, who were now sitting on the high table, legs dangling, drinking their kava, and with chocolate mustaches on their faces. They had already forgotten the scare. They were resilient because she had taught them to be. Lena, do you want some too? Finn asked, innocently handing her his glass. Lena smiled a sad, broken smile. No, my little shots. That's so you grow up strong. Who will read them a story tonight? She wondered anxiously. Who will check under the bed to make sure there are no monsters? Victoria won't. Maximilian is never around. The thought of leaving those two little angels at the mercy of that cold woman broke her heart more than her own misfortune. The tension in the office was electric. Maximilian walked to his enormous oak desk, but didn't sit down. He leaned against the edge, crossing his arms over his broad chest, looking at Victoria, who had sunk into one of the leather armchairs, adopting a studied pose of fragility. She held a handkerchief to her eyes, though Maximilian noted cynically that there were no real tears. I don't know what that maid told you, Victoria began, feigning a sob, but I swear she's a manipulator. Since she arrived, she has turned the children against me. I try to educate them, Maximilian. I try to prepare them for the real world so they can be gentlemen like you. And she only encourages disorder and filth. Today she answered me back. She disrespected me in my own home. Maximilian let her speak. He let the excuses flow. Listening to every lie, every exaggeration, he watched as Victoria twisted the truth to become the martyr. Just a few hours ago, he would have believed her blindly. He would have thought, poor Victoria, she tries so hard with children that aren't hers. But the image of Finn's laughter, that pure and healing laughter in the garden, stood like a shield against his fiancée's poisonous words. Are you finished? Maximilian asked when she paused to catch her breath. Victoria blinked, surprised by the lack of comfort. How can you be so cold? I'm upset, Maximilian. That woman is a danger. I want her to leave right now. Pay her whatever she wants, but make her leave. I'm not going to spend another night under the same roof as that insolent creature. Maximilian moved away from the desk and walked slowly towards the window that overlooked the back garden. From there, you could see the exact spot where the children had been playing. You're right about one thing, Victoria, he said without looking at her. The situation in this house is unsustainable, and today I am going to take drastic changes. Victoria sighed in relief, drying her dry eyes. She stood up and went towards him, hugging him from behind, resting her cheek on his suit. Thank you, Liebling. I knew you would understand. It's the best thing for the children. We need someone professional, an English governess, perhaps someone with class, not a peasant woman who smells like a stable. Maximilian tensed up at her touch, turned slowly, forcing her to let go, and looked directly into her eyes. His expression was indecipherable, obscure. Sit down, Victoria. I'm not finished. The order was gentle but relentless. Victoria's smile faltered. Something in Maximilian's tone didn't fit with the capitulation she was expecting. She sat down again, crossing her legs nervously, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle in her skirt. Maximilian walked around the desk and opened a drawer. Victoria craned her neck, expecting to see a checkbook to pay the employee, but Maximilian didn't withdraw any money. He took out a framed photograph that he had kept face down for the past 2 years. It was a photo of his late wife, Lena, laughing with the newborn twins. He placed it on the desk, looking at the picture with a mixture of pain and determination. It's been 2 years since I heard my children laugh, Victoria, said Maximilian, his deep voice echoing in the silent room. For 2 years, I've hired the best agencies, psychologists, educators. Nobody achieved anything. Only silence and fear. Well, they're children, Maximilian. They get over things, Victoria interrupted disdainfully. Besides, they laugh because that girl lets them act like clowns. That's not education. It's debauchery. It's happiness, Maximilian corrected, tapping the table with his index finger, a sharp sound that made Victoria jump. It's love. Something I'm realizing today has been terribly lacking in this house despite my money. Victoria stiffened. Are you reproaching me for something? I do what I can. I'm not their mother, Maximilian. I make a huge effort to accept them. I know, Maximilian said, and for a second he seemed tired. I know you're not their mother, but today I saw something else. I saw fear, Victoria. When you went out onto the terrace, my children didn't run to you. They hid from you. They hid behind the peasant woman, as you call her, because she manipulates them, Victoria shouted, losing her composure. She fills their heads with lies. No, Maximilian's voice thundered in the office, rattling the glass of the display case. Victoria shrank back in her chair, terrified. She had never seen him raise his voice like that. Enough with the lies. I have eyes, Victoria. I saw the way you look at them. I saw the disgust on your face when Lucas soiled your dress last week. I saw how you scream. And today, I saw how that girl you despise gave them more affection in 5 minutes than you have in 6 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria was pale, breathing heavily. She knew she was losing ground and had to change her strategy quickly. Maximilian, Liebling, she began to cry again, this time with tears of real frustration. I'm stressed about the wedding, the preparations. All of this is too much for me. Perhaps I've been a little harsh, I admit, but it's for their own good. Fire her, please. Let's start over. I promise I'll be more patient. Maximilian looked at her for a long minute, assessing her. He was a businessman. He knew how to read people, and what he saw in front of him was no longer the woman of his dreams, but a strange calculator. I'm not going to fire her, he finally said. Victoria's eyes widened. What? But she disrespected me. She defied me. If she stays, my children are happy. Maximilian cut her off relentlessly. And that's all that matters to me right now. In fact, I've made an executive decision. From this moment on, Lena is no longer in charge of cleaning. Victoria smiled hopefully for a microsecond. He's going to send her to the kitchen, to the laundry. Lena will be the head governess and in complete charge of Lucas and Finn's care, Maximilian declared. Each word landed like a death sentence for Victoria's plans. Her salary will triple. She'll have total authority over the children's routine, meals, and activities. You're crazy. She's an illiterate servant, Victoria shrieked, jumping to her feet, red with anger. I won't let some lowly woman tell me how to treat the children in my own house. Maximilian leaned across the desk, bringing his face close to hers. His eyes were two dark, warning wells. This is my house, Victoria, and these are my children, and I have another new rule starting today. You are forbidden from going near them unsupervised. I don't want you alone with Lucas or Finn ever. Victoria felt as if she'd been slapped. You're treating me like a criminal, she whispered in disbelief. I'm your fiancée. I'll be your wife in 2 months. So behave like one, Maximilian replied, straightening up and adjusting his vest. If you really want to be part of this family, you'll have to earn that place. And I'm warning you, Victoria, I'll be watching. One more mistake, one more unjustified shout, one more tear caused by you, and there will be no wedding. Understood? Victoria clenched her fists at her sides, digging her nails into her palms. The hatred she felt at that moment was so intense that it made her dizzy. She hated children. She hated Maximilian for humiliating her. But above all, she hated Lena. That little goody two-shoes was stealing her future, her inheritance, her status. But Victoria was intelligent. She knew that if she kept shouting, Maximilian would kick her out. She needed time. She needed a plan. She swallowed his pride, forced an expression of painful resignation, and lowered her head. Okay, Maximilian, she said in a submissive voice. If that's what you want, I accept it. I'll do anything to show you that I care. Good. Maximilian didn't relax. He didn't entirely believe her, but he was giving her enough rope to hang herself if she tried anything. Now go to your room. I need to talk to Lena. Victoria left the office walking stiffly, her dignity in tatters. But as soon as she closed the door and was alone in the hallway, her face transformed into a mask of pure evil. Enjoy your victory today, little maid, she whispered into the empty air, as her eyes rested on Lena's humble handbag, hanging on the coat rack in the hall. Because tomorrow you'll wish you'd never been born. Inside the office, Maximilian slumped into his leather chair, letting out a sigh he felt he had been holding for years. He ran his hands over his face, rubbing his tired eyes. He had won a battle, but he felt the war had only just begun. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Maria, he called to the cook, please tell Lena to come to the office. He had to break the news immediately. He had to tell this young woman with the frightened eyes that not only was she fired, but she had just become the most important person in the house after him. and he had to do it before fear made her run away. What Maximilian didn't know was that by giving Lena power, he had just put a target on her back. That night, the Gut Lindenhof seemed enveloped in a calm. Deceptive, but within the stone and wood walls, the tension was so thick you could almost taste it. Maximilian didn't go up to sleep. After his tense confrontation with Victoria, and having reassured Lena, who still couldn't believe her promotion and raise, the millionaire locked himself in his office again. But this time he wasn't alone. In front of him, a security technician he trusted implicitly was finishing setting up a private server on the main computer. Maximilian had made a radical decision. If he was going to wage war within his own home, he needed eyes in every corner. "Everything's ready, Herr von Hohenstein," said the technician, closing his metal briefcase. High-resolution cameras with microphones in the game room, the kitchen, the hallways, and as you requested, 2 micro cameras hidden in the picture frames in the living room. No one will notice they're there. They're motion-activated, and everything is uploaded to this encrypted cloud. Only you have the key. Maximilian nodded, his serious face illuminated by the blue light of the monitors. "Thank you, Roberto. I want this to stay between us. Not a word to Victoria or the staff." "Of course, sir." The technician hesitated for a moment. By the way, when the new system was connected to the house's central server, the software automatically retrieved the history from the security camera on the hallway. That camera has always been there, even though you hardly ever check it. The system backed up the last 6 months. Would you like me to delete it to free up space? Maximilian felt a chill. The hallway camera pointed directly at the twins' bedroom door in the suite he shared with Victoria when she stayed over. "No," Maximilian said in a voice that sounded strange even to him. "Don't delete anything. Leave it there. You can go." When he was alone, the silence of the large house enveloped him. Maximilian poured himself a whiskey but didn't drink it. He sat down in front of the screen and opened the folder of recovered files. His hands, usually firm for closing million-dollar deals, trembled slightly over the mouse. What was he going to find? He was being paranoid. Maybe Victoria was right and he was overreacting because of stress. Maybe her outburst that afternoon had been an isolated slip-up. He clicked on a random file. Date, 3 weeks ago. Time, 2 p.m. The black and white image appeared on the screen. The hallway was empty. Suddenly, the door to the children's room opened. Victoria came out. Maximilian leaned forward. In the video, Victoria looked both ways down the hallway, checking that no one was there. Then she turned toward the open door, and although there was no audio on that old camera, the gesture was unmistakable. She made an obscene gesture with her hand toward the children's room and slammed the door. Maximilian felt a pang in his stomach, but that wasn't a crime, just a display of her lack of class. He needed more. He kept searching for a file. 2 months ago, a Tuesday night, he was traveling in München. On the screen, Victoria was seen dragging Lucas by the arm. The boy, who in the video showed him looking tiny and fragile, trying to stop himself with his socks slipping on the waxed floor. He was clearly crying desperately. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, crouched down, and yelled something in his face. The violence of her gestures was evident. Then it happened. Maximilian dropped the glass of whiskey, which shattered on the floor, staining the Persian rug, but he didn't even blink. In the video, Victoria viciously pinched the boy's arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a twisted, cruel pinch, designed to cause sharp pain without leaving visible marks. Lucas doubled over in pain. Victoria straightened up, smoothed her hair, and continued dragging him toward her room. Seconds later, she pulled out her phone and appeared to make a call, her expression instantly changing from fury to feigned nonchalance. Maximilian remembered that night. Victoria had called him. "Maximilian, Liebling, Lucas is out of control. He won't stop crying and screaming. He's hitting himself. It's causing me so much anguish. I don't know what to do with him. I think he needs medication." He had believed her. Good God, he had believed. He had thought his son had serious emotional problems. He had considered sending him to a special school, and all the while the problem, the monster, was sleeping beside him. Bile rose in his throat. Maximilian played the video over and over. Every second was a knife to his father's heart. He watched more videos. He saw Victoria kicking the children's toys when she thought no one was watching. He saw her take a plate of food from Finn and throw it in the trash, leaving the boy crying from hunger in the hallway while she went to her room. It was a catalog of domestic terror, systematic psychological torture carried out by a sociopath who only wanted his money and who saw her children as obstacles that had to be neutralized. Maximilian closed his eyes, breathing heavily. The fury he felt now wasn't hot or explosive like the one from the afternoon. It was cold. It was a black ice that covered his soul. He wanted to go upstairs, wake her up, and throw her out onto the street. He wanted her to feel the same fear his children had felt. But he stopped. If he threw her out now, she would play the victim. She would say he was crazy, that the videos were taken out of context. She would sue for breach of contract. She would try to destroy his reputation. No, Maximilian von Hohenstein didn't survive in the business world by being impulsive. He survived by being lethal. He saved all the files to an external hard drive and put it in his safe. Then he wiped away a single tear that was running down his cheek. "I'm sorry, my children," he whispered into the darkness. "Papa was blind, but I swear on your mother's memory that this woman is going to wipe out every tear she's made you shed. She's not just going to leave here. I'm going to destroy her." He looked at the monitor one last time. Now he was seeing a live feed from the children's room, thanks to the new cameras. There was Lena. It was 3 a.m. But she was awake. She sat in a rocking chair between the two little beds, watching over the twins' sleep. She had a book in her hand, reading by the dim light of a small lamp. But every few minutes she got up to tuck one in or touch the other's forehead. The comparison was devastating. The woman who wore silks was a demon. The woman in a uniform was a guardian angel. Maximilian felt something strange in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, gratitude and something more. Something nascent and dangerous. Profound admiration. He got up determined. Tomorrow would be another day. Victoria would try something. He was sure of it. Her wounded ego wouldn't allow her to remain still, but he would be ready. The trap was set, and he had his finger on the trigger. What Maximilian didn't anticipate was the speed and malice with which Victoria would counterattack. Dawn arrived with a leaden-gray sky that threatened a storm, a perfect reflection of the atmosphere inside the mansion. Victoria woke up early, much earlier than usual. She hadn't slept. Good. The humiliation of the previous day burned in her stomach like acid. She knew her position hung by a thread. Maximilian had demoted her, stripped her of power, and worst of all, given authority to the maid. As she brushed her hair in front of her vanity mirror, Victoria reviewed her plan. It was risky, but she had no choice. It had to be definitive. It had to be something so serious that Maximilian would have no choice but to fire Lena and even put her in jail. The mistreatment hadn't worked because Maximilian had sided with the children. Good, then she would attack where it hurts the rich most. Their wealth. "You're going to learn who's in charge here, you two-bit nanny," she muttered to her reflection, applying blood-red lipstick. She waited for Maximilian to leave. She knew he had an important meeting with some Japanese investors in the city and wouldn't be back until the afternoon. She heard the Mercedes engine disappear down the gravel road and smiled. The playing field was clear. She descended the stairs with deathly calm. In the living room, she heard laughter. Lena was already working in her new position. She was sitting on the rug with the twins, putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle. The scene was idyllic, domestic, perfect. Victoria felt like throwing up. "Good morning, Frau Victoria," Lena said when she saw her standing respectfully. Despite her rise, Lena remained humble. Victoria did not respond. She walked past with her nose in the air, heading towards the library. "Don't worry," Lena heard the children say. "Let's keep looking for the piece of the blue screen." Victoria entered Maximilian's office, which was now unlocked, an oversight she appreciated, and went straight to the wall safe hidden behind a painting. She knew the combination. Maximilian had given it to her months ago, just in case something urgent happened. With nimble fingers, she dialed the numbers. The mechanism clicked. Inside were belts, documents, and the family jewelry box. Victoria opened the blue velvet box. There was the Diamant Collier aus Familienbesitz that had belonged to Maximilian's grandmother. a unique piece valued at over 500,000 euros. It was the family's most prized jewel, the one Maximilian had promised she would wear on her wedding day. She took out the necklace, feeling the cold weight of the stones in her hand. Goodbye, wedding, she thought ironically. But hello, freedom. She closed the safe and left the office, hiding the jewel in her jacket pocket. She walked stealthily toward the service area. She knew that at that time the rest of the staff were busy with the outdoor laundry or in the garden. The hallway leading to the staff rooms was deserted. She entered the small, simple room that Lena occupied. Everything was meticulously arranged. A photo of an older woman on the bedside table. Her sick mother, Victoria surmised disdainfully, had a Bible in her personal bag, a worn backpack made of cheap fabric, hanging behind the door. Victoria opened the backpack. Inside there were simple things: hand cream, a wallet with some coins, a comb. With a swift gesture, she wrapped the diamond necklace in a dirty handkerchief she found right there and stuffed it at the bottom of her backpack under a spare sweater. Perfect, she whispered. She left the room, closed the door, and returned to the main hall. Her heart was beating strongly, not from fear, but from the excitement of the hunt. She sat on the sofa, waited 10 minutes to calm her breathing, and then, with an Oscar-worthy performance, let out a heart-wrenching scream. No, my God, no! The scream echoed throughout the house. Lena, who was in the dining room giving the children lunch, dropped her spoon and ran towards the living room with the twins behind her. Frau Victoria, what's wrong? Lena asked, alarmed. Victoria was standing next to a side table where she usually left her things, frantically rummaging through her own bag, throwing the contents onto the floor. The necklace, Maximilian's grandmother's diamant collier aus Familienbesitz, she shouted with tears in her eyes. I took it out of the safe to clean it for tonight's dinner, and it's not there. I left it here 5 minutes ago. Lena approached, looking worried. Are you sure? Maybe it fell. Let's go find it. Don't come any closer, Victoria shrieked, backing away as if Lena had the plague. You've been the only one hanging around here. You. Lena put a hand to her chest in shock. Fräulein, I've been with the children in the dining room the whole time. I haven't even entered this room. Lie. Victoria took out her mobile phone with trembling hands. Maximilian is going to kill me. It's a family heirloom. There's a thief in this house and I'm going to find out who she is. Victoria dialed the number, but she didn't call Maximilian. She called the Landespolizei. Polizei, I need urgent help. I want to report a robbery at the Gut Lindenhof. €1 million robbery. Yes, I have the suspect in custody. Please come quickly. She is a domestic worker. She hung up and looked at Lena with a triumphant smile, barely concealed beneath her mask of anguish. The police are coming, Lena. If it was you, you'd better confess now. Perhaps Maximilian will take pity, but I didn't do anything. Lena stammered, her eyes filled with tears, looking at the children who clung to her legs, frightened by the screams. I swear on my life, on my mother. We'll see about that, Victoria said, crossing her arms. The police are going to search everything. Your things, your room, everything. Upon hearing your room, Lena paled, not because she had something to hide, but because of the invasion of her privacy, because of the shame. Victoria interpreted that paleness as guilt, and her inner smile widened. The minutes passed slowly and agonizingly. The children were crying softly. Lena tried to comfort them, but she herself was trembling. Victoria paced back and forth like a caged lion, feigning despair. That necklace is worth more than your whole life, brat. She spat at her as they passed by. You're going to rot in jail, and guess what will happen to your sick mother when you're not around to pay for her medicine? She'll die alone. That blow was low and brutal. Lena whimpered, covering her mouth. You're evil, Lucas. Little Lucas suddenly shouted, confronting the witch. Leave Lena alone. Victoria was surprised, but before she could reply, the sound of sirens filled the air. Blue and red lights bounced off the white walls of the living room. 2 Landespolizei patrol cars sped along the driveway, kicking up dust. Your time has come, Victoria whispered in Lena's ear. At that moment, the house phone rang. Victoria ignored it. She knew it could be Maximilian, alerted by the security system at the entrance. She wasn't going to answer until Lena was handcuffed and in the back seat of the patrol car. She wanted a fait accompli. The officers got in, hands on their seatbelts. "Who called to report the robbery?" asked the sergeant, a burly man with a mustache. "It was me," Victoria said, stepping forward with an aristocratic air. "I am the future lady of this house. I have suffered the theft of a jewel of immense value, and I am certain she is the culprit." She pointed at Lena with a long, manicured, accusing finger. All eyes in the room turned to the young governess, trembling as she clutched two small children, her guilt only born of paralyzing fear. The scene was set, and Victoria's trap seemed perfect. What she didn't know was that in the upstairs office, a red light was silently blinking on a hard drive, recording every second of her crime. But would Maximilian arrive in time to see the recording before Lena was taken away? The sound of police boots striking the creaking wood of the service corridor echoed like gunshots in the tense silence of the house. Lena was escorted by two officers, her head bowed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, soaking the collar of her uniform. Behind them, Victoria advanced with a determined stride, maintaining her mask of indignant victimhood, but with a glint of malicious satisfaction in her eyes that she could barely conceal. "Please, officer, I beg you," Lena sobbed, her voice breaking with hiccups. "I haven't taken anything. You can search everything, but don't do this to me in front of the children." "It's standard procedure, Fräulein," replied Sergeant Mueller, a gruff man who seemed uncomfortable with the situation but determined to do his duty. "The homeowner has filed a formal complaint of grand theft. We have to search your belongings." They reached Lena's small room. It was a humble, immaculate space that smelled of lavender and cheap soap. Victoria stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. "Search thoroughly," Victoria ordered. "Those goody two-shoes are the worst. They hide things where you least expect them." One of the officers began opening the drawers, pulling out Lena's folded clothes and tossing them carelessly onto the bed. Lena felt like she was dying of shame at the sight of her old, patched underwear, exposed to the men's gaze and Victoria's contempt. But she remained still, trembling, silently praying that it was all a nightmare and she would wake up soon. "Nothing here," the first officer said. "Check the bag," Victoria insisted, nodding her chin at the worn backpack hanging behind the door. "She always carries that thing everywhere. She's bound to have the loot in there." The sergeant took the backpack down. Lena held her breath. She knew there was nothing in there, just her personal belongings. "Let them open it," she thought. "Let them see I'm honest." The officer unzipped it and dumped the contents onto the nightstand. A comb, a coin purse, a pack of tissues, and then, with a heavy metallic clang, and brilliant, a bundle wrapped in a dirty rag rolled to the edge of the table. The rag partially unraveled, revealing the unmistakable green flash of the emeralds and the white fire of the diamonds. Time stood still. Lena opened her mouth, but the air caught in her throat. Her eyes widened so much they hurt. "Aha!" Victoria exclaimed, entering the room with perfect theatricality. "I knew it. There she is, thief, damn thief." "No," whispered Lena, backing away until she hit the wall. "No, that's not mine. I didn't put that there. Someone put it there. I swear." Silence. The sergeant ordered, taking the collar with latex gloves to examine it. "Fräulein, you are under arrest for the alleged crime of aggravated robbery. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The metallic sound of the handcuffs closing around Lena's slender wrist was the most terrible sound she had ever heard. She felt the cold metal bite her skin, but her heart hurt more. It was happening. She was going to jail. Her mother would be left alone. Her life was over. "No, let her go!" The child's scream broke the scene. Lucas and Finn had escaped from the kitchen where the cook was trying to keep them and appeared in the hallway. Upon seeing their beloved Lulu in handcuffs, panic gripped them. "Don't take her away," Finn shouted, running to hug Lena's legs, crying uncontrollably. "She's good," Lucas said, hitting the policeman's leg with his little fists. "Bad, you're bad." "Get these children out of here," Victoria bellowed, feigning concern. "They can't see this. Maria, take them away." The cook, tears welling in her eyes, had to drag the kicking, screaming children away, calling for Lena. "Lulu, Lulu." Lena, her hands tied behind her back, turned her head for one last look, her face streaked with tears. Be good, my loves, she whispered, before the officer pushed her toward the exit. Everything's going to be all right. They led her out of the house like a dangerous criminal under the triumphant gaze of Victoria, who walked behind the police detail, making sure the spectacle was complete. They emerged onto the front porch where the afternoon sun beat down. The patrol car's back door was open, waiting to swallow her. The sergeant shoved her head down to pull her inside. Lena closed her eyes, sinking into the hard plastic seat, defeated. The smell of a confinement and stale sweat of the police vehicle hit her. It was over. Victoria had won. But just as the officer was about to close the door, a roaring sound was heard approaching at full speed along the cypress-lined driveway. It wasn't a normal car. It was a V8 engine being pushed to its limits. A Schwartz Mercedes S-Class appeared, skidding around the bend, raising a cloud of dust and gravel. The car screeched to a halt right in front of the patrol car, completely blocking its path. Victoria frowned in annoyance. What's he doing here so early, she thought, feeling a first flutter of nervousness. The driver's door flew open. Maximilian von Hohenstein got out of the vehicle. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His face didn't express fury. It expressed something much worse, a lethal, cold, and calculating calm. "Papa!" the twins shouted from the doorway of the house where they had managed to break free from the cook. "Papa, help Lulu. The police are taking her away." Maximilian didn't look at his children. He didn't look at Victoria. He walked straight toward the sergeant with long, heavy strides that echoed on the gravel. "Can someone tell me what the hell is going on my property?" "Sergeant," Maximilian asked in a voice that, although low, had such authority that the officers instinctively straightened their backs. "Herr von Hohenstein," said the policeman, a little intimidated, "we responded to an emergency call from your fiancée. We found a high-value stolen jewel in the possession of your employee. She is under arrest." Victoria ran towards him, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Maximilian, Liebling, it was horrible," she exclaimed, trying to hug him. "She stole your grandmother's Diamant Collier aus Familienbesitz. We found it in her backpack. Thank God I called the police in time." Maximilian stopped her with a hand gesture without touching her. Then he leaned towards the patrol car window and looked at Lena. She was huddled in the seat with red, swollen eyes. When she saw Maximilian, she didn't see her savior. She saw the man who would surely condemn her. She lowered her gaze in shame. "It wasn't me, Herr Maximilian," she whispered almost inaudibly. "Please believe me." Maximilian straightened up slowly, looked at the sergeant, and then fixed his dark eyes on Victoria. "Sergeant," Maximilian said in a steely voice, "get that woman out of the car right now." "Sir, I can't do that," the officer replied. "The evidence is overwhelming. The necklace was in her bag. It is a serious crime." "I said to take her out," Maximilian repeated. And this time his tone brooked no argument. "Because if you take her, you'll be arresting the wrong person. And I assure you, Sergeant, my legal team will have your badge end up at the bottom of a lost and found drawer before nightfall." A deathly silence fell over the estate. Victoria felt the air suddenly turn very cold despite the sun. "Maximilian, what are you saying?" she asked with a nervous laugh. "The evidence is right there. Are you going to defend a thief over me?" Maximilian reached into his pants pocket. Victoria held her breath, waiting to see what he'd pull out. A gun? Money? Maximilian took out his state-of-the-art cell phone. "I'm not going to defend anyone with words, Victoria," he said, unlocking the screen with his thumb. "I'm going to let the truth speak for itself." Sergeant Mueller, wavering between the millionaire's order and police procedure, signaled his partner to wait. Maximilian turned the phone so both the officer and Victoria could see the screen. "I installed a new internal security system last night," Maximilian said, staring intently at Victoria. She saw the color drain from her fiancé's face, leaving her deathly pale. Hidden cameras, high definition, motion activation. Victoria felt her legs give way. "No, it can't be," she thought. "I checked the corners. There were no cameras." But Maximilian wasn't lying. A clear video played on the phone screen, dated and timed for that very morning. The video showed the service corridor. Lena's room door was closed. Suddenly, Victoria appeared in the frame. She looked nervously around, took something from her pocket, a shiny bundle, and entered the maid's room. Maximilian swiped. Next video. Interior camera footage from the room, the one hidden in the smoke detector. Victoria was seen opening Lena's backpack, taking the necklace out of the scarf, stuffing it at the bottom, and closing everything again. Before leaving, she smiled at herself in the mirror, a villainous smile that chilled everyone present. "Is this your evidence, Sergeant?" Maximilian asked, pausing the video just as Victoria planted the necklace. His voice was calm but filled with infinite contempt. "Because to me, this seems like irrefutable proof of fabricating a crime, filing a false report, and possibly attempted extortion." Sergeant Mueller watched the video, then looked at Victoria, and his expression changed drastically. Deference vanished, replaced by professional harshness. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" Victoria was paralyzed. Her perfect world, her wedding, her status, everything crumbled in seconds before her eyes. She tried to speak, but only a stifled whimper escaped. She looked at Maximilian for mercy, but in the eyes of the man who was to be her husband, she found only a wall of ice. "It's a setup," Victoria finally screamed in a desperate and pathetic attempt. "He manipulated it. He wants to get rid of me. That woman has him under her spell." Maximilian ignored her cries, walked over to the patrol car, and opened the back door himself. "Officer, take off the handcuffs," he ordered. The officer obeyed quickly. As soon as the handcuffs fell, Lena rubbed her aching wrists, staring at Maximilian in disbelief. He extended his hand, not like a patron saint to a servant, but like a man to a woman he respected. "Get out, Lena, you're safe." Lena took his trembling hand and got out of the car. She barely put a foot on the gravel. The twins broke through the adult barrier and ran toward her, clinging to her legs so tightly they almost knocked her over. Maximilian watched the scene, feeling a lump in his throat. This was his family, not the woman screaming hysterically a few feet away, but this simple young woman and her 2 children. "Sergeant," Maximilian said, turning to the policeman. "I want to press charges against the employee, sir," the officer asked, confused by the speed of events. "No." Maximilian pointed a firm finger at Victoria. "I want her removed from my property immediately. And if she ever comes within 500 meters of my children or Lena again, I will use every penny of my fortune to make sure she spends the rest of her youth behind bars." Victoria stumbled backward, tripping over her own heels. "Maximilian, you can't do this to me. I'm Victoria von Falken, my father. Your father will find out tonight what you've done." Maximilian cut her off. "And I'll also send him the videos of how you treated my children when you thought no one was watching." That was the final blow. The threat of exposing the child abuse destroyed any remaining arrogance in Victoria. She knew it would ruin her socially forever. "You're a monster," she spat venomously. "You deserve this country maid. You deserve each other." "Thank you," Maximilian replied with a wry half-smile. "That's the best compliment you've ever given me." The sergeant gestured to Victoria. "Fräulein, come with us. We need to take your statement at the police station for filing a false report." "Don't touch me," she shrieked, shaking off the officer's arm. "I'll go by myself. I don't need your disgusting patrol car." "I'm afraid procedure is procedure," the sergeant said with a satisfied tone. He took her arm firmly and led her to the same back seat where Lena had been just minutes before. The humiliation was complete. Victoria, the queen of society, getting into a police car before the eyes of all the domestic staff who had come out to watch the spectacle. Maximilian waited until the police car disappeared down the road, taking with it the toxicity that had poisoned his house for months. Silence returned to the Gut Lindenhof, but this time it wasn't an oppressive silence. It was a clean silence, like the air after a storm. He turned to Lena. She was still kneeling on the gravel, hugging the children, weeping silently. Maximilian knelt beside her. "Forgive me," he said softly. "I should have seen it coming. I should have protected you better." Lena looked up. Her honey-colored eyes were filled with tears, but also with immense gratitude. "You saved me, Maximilian. I thought that no one would believe me." "I believe you," he affirmed, and for the first time broke the physical distance and placed a hand on her shoulder. "And I promise you that no one will ever hurt you in this house again." At that moment, Lucas, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, let go of Lena and threw himself into his father's arms. "Papa, superhero!" shouted the boy. Maximilian felt the impact of the small body against his chest and hugged it tightly, closing his eyes. He smelled baby soap and garden soil. He felt Lena's hand timidly brushing against his arm, and in that instant, amidst the chaos and adrenaline, Maximilian von Hohenstein knew that his previous life was over. Victoria had left, and with her, the coldness. He was doing something new on the estate, something fragile but powerful. But fate was not finished with them. The tension of the moment, the adrenaline, and the accumulated fear took their toll. Lena tried to stand up to take the children inside, but suddenly her face turned as white as paper. She put a hand to her head, staggered, and before Maximilian could react, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed unconscious on the floor. "Lena!" Maximilian shouted, letting go of Lucas and catching her just before her head hit the stone. Her body was burning with fever. Maximilian looked at her arm, where the sleeve of her uniform had ridden up slightly as she fell. There at the bend of the elbow, he saw a recent purple bruise and a small puncture mark with a cotton ball taped on. What was happening? What secret was Lena hiding that had led to her collapse just when she was safe? Maximilian lifted her in his arms effortlessly, feeling how light she was, too light. "Call the doctor!" He roared towards the house, running with her inside. Now the Mercedes engine roared like a wounded beast as Maximilian devoured the asphalt of the country road. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles looked as if they were about to pierce his skin. But his mind wasn't on driving. It was in the passenger seat, where she looked unconscious, her head resting against the window, and the seatbelt holding her fragile body like a rag doll. "Hold on, Lena, please, hold on," murmured Maximilian, looking alternately at the road and the young woman's pale face. In the rearview mirror, he could see the Gutshof getting smaller in the distance. He had left the children with Maria, the cook, under the strict promise to lock all the doors and not let anyone in until he knocked. Lucas and Finn had cried when they saw their father carry their Lulu away in his arms, and that crying echoed in Maximilian's head louder than the engine. The Millionaire floored the accelerator on a straightaway. The speedometer read 180, then 200. He didn't care about the fines, he didn't care about anything but getting to the central hospital in München. As he drove, the image of that bruise on Lena's arm burned into his memory. Drugs? Impossible. Not with that sweetness, not with that infinite patience, perhaps an illness. But there was something else, something that eluded him and made him feel a dense, sticky guilt in his stomach. Upon arriving at the emergency room entrance, Maximilian braked suddenly, ignoring the no parking lines. He got out of the car, walked around the vehicle, and carried Lena out in his arms before the orderlies could even approach with the stretcher. "I need a doctor!" he bellowed as he entered the waiting room with an authority that silenced the murmur of the people. "Right now." The staff reacted instantly, not for his money, but because of the palpable desperation in his voice. A nurse and a young doctor rushed toward him with a stretcher. "What happened?" the doctor asked as they positioned Lena and started running toward the cubicles. "She suddenly fainted. She has a fever. She has a needle mark on her left arm." "Recent," Maximilian explained, running alongside the stretcher. The doctor stopped abruptly in the doorway of the resuscitation room, blocking Maximilian's path with a firm hand on his chest. "We'll handle it from here, sir. Wait outside. We need space. I'm not going to leave her alone. If you want to help her, let us work. Nurse, take vitals. Code yellow." The swinging doors slammed shut in Maximilian's face, leaving him alone in the sterile corridor, the smell of disinfectant filling his lungs and his shirt stained with a bit of garden soil that had remained on the uniform of Lena. Maximilian ran his hands through his hair, breathing heavily. He felt useless. He, Maximilian von Hohenstein, the man who could buy entire buildings with a phone call, couldn't do anything to help the only person who had brought electricity to his house in years. He walked over to the hard plastic chairs and slumped down. That's when he noticed he was still carrying Lena's purse slung over his shoulder. He'd grabbed it instinctively as they left the house, thinking they might need her ID. With trembling hands, he opened the worn backpack. He needed to know who she really was. He needed to understand. The first thing he saw was her ID, Lena Fernandez, 23 years old, Address in one of the poorest neighborhoods on the outskirts of München. Maximilian stroked the photo on the document. Even there in the terrible lighting, she had a kind look. He kept searching. He moved aside the old sweater Victoria had used to hide the necklace and found a clear plastic folder. What he saw inside chilled him to the bone more than any threat from Victoria. It was invoices, dozens of them, Santa Maria Hospital, cancer treatment, patient Rosa Fernandez. The dates were recent, the amounts exorbitant. There were receipts for partial payments, ridiculously small sums of 50 or 100 euros paid religiously every week. Underneath the invoices, he found a crumpled piece of paper from that very morning. It was a receipt from a private blood and plasma bank. Donor Lena Fernandez. Extraction, 450 malmo. Payment received, 40 euros. Maximilian felt like the world was crashing down on him. He checked the time on the receipt. 7 a.m. Reality hit him like a physical punch. Lena wasn't doing drugs. Lena was selling herself drop by drop to pay for her mother's chemotherapy. She had gone to donate blood first thing in the morning, probably without breakfast to get to work on time, and then had spent the day running after the twins in the sun, enduring the shouting and stress caused by Victoria. And yet she had still had the energy to smile, to dance, to play. "Mein God," whispered Maximilian, feeling tears of helplessness sting his eyes. "What have we done to you, Lena?" At that moment, his personal phone vibrated in his pocket. It was his lawyer, Roberto. Maximilian answered, his voice sounding hoarse and dangerous. "Tell me, Roberto." "Herr von Hohenstein, I have news from the police station. Fräulein Victoria is trying to negotiate. She says it was a misunderstanding, that she was on medication. Her father is on his way and is threatening to sue for defamation if we don't drop the charges and hand over the videos. They say the recordings are illegal." Maximilian stood up, clutching the phone with cold fury. The image of the medical receipts in his hand clashed violently with the thought of Victoria and her expensive lawyers trying to salvage her reputation. "Listen to me carefully, Roberto," Maximilian said, walking to the hallway window. "I'm not withdrawing anything. In fact, I want you to do something else." "Tell me, sir." "Call the director of Santa Maria Hospital. Find out the total balance of Frau Rosa Fernandez's debt." "Excuse me, who is she?" "Just do it. Pay the entire debt anonymously, and then I want you to write a press release. If Victoria's father wants war, we'll give him war. If they leak a single lie about Lena or me, I'll post the videos of the abuse of my children on every social media platform before they can get a court order to arrest me. Tell them I have copies on servers on 3 continents. Either they leave my life quietly or I'll destroy them. Understood?" "Understood, sir. I consider the matter closed. Nobody wants that kind of publicity. And the hospital debt. Pay it now and hire a private nurse for that lady so she wants for nothing." Maximilian hung up. He felt a little lighter, but the fear was still there. He looked toward the swinging doors of the emergency room. He had used his money to destroy his enemies and to help Lena's mother, but his money couldn't make Lena wake up. That depended on her strength. And if he'd learned anything today, it was that Lena was the strongest person he'd ever met. Suddenly, the door opened and the doctor came out, wearily removing his mask. Maximilian approached quickly, searching the doctor's face for any sign of life. "How is she?" he asked, his heart pounding. "Stable," the doctor said, and Maximilian let out a sigh. "But we need to talk, Herr von Hohenstein. Your employee is in a critical state of exhaustion." The doctor led Maximilian to a more private corner of the corridor, away from the prying ears of other patients. His expression was stern, almost accusatory. "Look, I don't know this girl's employment status," the doctor began, crossing his arms. "But what I've seen in there is worrying. She has severe anemia. Her iron levels are extremely low. She's dehydrated and shows clear signs of chronic malnutrition." Maximilian felt a pang of shame. Malnutrition, at his home, where leftover food was thrown away every day. "Malnutrition," he repeated incredulously. "Yes, and to top it all off, she donated blood this morning. In her condition, that's a ticking time bomb. Her body simply collapsed. She had no energy reserves. Do you know if she's eating properly? Because it seems she's been skipping meals for weeks." Maximilian closed his eyes, remembering lunches. Lena always served the children, always made sure they ate everything, but he had never seen her sit down to eat with them. Victoria forbade her from eating the adults' food. She was probably eating leftovers or simply not eating to save every penny. "It's my fault," Maximilian said gravely. "I didn't know, but it's my responsibility." Will she recover? She's going to recover with rest, IV fluids, and a proper diet. She's young and strong, but she needs to stop. She needs to stop working for a while and take care of herself. We've sedated her so she can rest, but she should wake up in a couple of hours. We'll move her to a ward. "I want the best room you have," ordered Maximilian, "and I want her to have a complete checkup. Don't miss a thing." 2 hours later, Maximilian was sitting in a leather armchair next to the bed in room 405. The hospital's private suite felt more like a luxury hotel than a clinic, but the silence was the same. Only the soft beep of the heart monitor marked the rhythm of time. Lena was fast asleep. Without her uniform, wearing a white hospital gown, she looked even younger and more vulnerable. Her pale skin contrasted with the dark hair spread across the pillow. Maximilian watched her, fascinated. He had spent the last 2 years surrounded by women who were after his money, his status, his last name. And here was a girl who was starving to save her mother and who was capable of giving unconditional love to other people's children without asking for anything in return. Maximilian reached out and with infinite care brushed a strand of hair away from Lena's forehead. Her skin was cool. "You're an angel, Lena," he whispered, "and I've been a stupid blind man." In that moment, Lena's eyelashes fluttered. Maximilian quickly withdrew his hand, feeling like an intruder. She opened her eyes slowly, confused by the dim light and unfamiliar surroundings. "Where?" Her voice was a raspy thread. She tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back down onto the pillows. "Relax," Maximilian said, leaning forward. "You're in the hospital. You fainted." Lena blinked, focusing her gaze until it met her boss's dark eyes. Suddenly, the memories of the afternoon flooded back. The police, Victoria, the handcuffs, the fainting spell. Panic gripped her. "The children," she exclaimed, trying to pull the IV out of her arm. "Where are they? Are they okay?" "They are safe," Maximilian assured her. "I have to go back, Herr Maximilian. I can't pay for this. This hospital is very expensive. Please, let me go." Maximilian took her hands firmly to prevent her from hurting herself. "Lena, look at me," he ordered gently. "The children are perfect. They are at home with Maria, having dinner, and asking when their Super Lulu will return. They are safe." Lena stopped fighting, but tears began to roll down her temples. "I have no money, sir. I can't be here. I have to work. If I'm absent tomorrow..." "And Victoria, Frau..." Victoria said she was going to fire me. "Victoria no longer exists in our lives," Maximilian said with an intensity that made Lena stop. "Victoria is gone forever, and you're not to lose your bomb. In effect..." Maximilian let go of one of her hands and took out of his jacket pocket the crumpled papers he had found in her backpack, the invoices for her cancer treatment. Lena stiffened when she saw them. Shame turned her cheeks red. Her secret, her poverty, her despair had been discovered. "Excuse me," she sobbed. "I didn't want you to know that I have problems. I didn't want to elicit pity." "Pity?" Maximilian got up from the armchair, indignant but not with her. "Lena, this is not pathetic. This is admirable. You've been carrying the world on your own. Why didn't you tell me? You're the boss, and I'm just the cleaning lady. I didn't want to bother you." Maximilian sighed in frustration with himself and with the social barriers that had prevented her from asking for help. He sat down again, staring intently into her eyes. "Listen carefully to what I'm going to say because I'm not going to repeat it. I paid your mother's hospital debt. All of it." Lena's world stopped. The monitor's beep seemed to disappear. "What?" she whispered. "It's paid for, and I've hired a nurse to take care of her at home while she recovers. You won't have to donate plasma again, skip meals, or work extra hours elsewhere. Your only job from now on is to take care of my children and take care of yourself." Lena looked at him as if he were speaking a strange language. She couldn't process so much generosity. "But it's a lot of money. I will return it to you. I will work for free for as long as necessary." "You're not going to work for me for free," Maximilian said, and a small smile appeared on his lips for the first time in hours. I'm going to pay you triple, like I told you in the office, because what you do for Lucas and Finn is priceless. You brought back their laughter, Lena. And today, seeing those bills, I understood that you are the noblest person I have ever met. Lena burst into tears, but this time it wasn't from fear or anguish. It was a cry of liberation. Years of tension, of fear of losing her mother, counting coins, enduring humiliations, all crumbled under the warm gaze of that man she believed to be unattainable. Thank you, she said, covering her face with her hands. Thank you, Herr Maximilian. Don't call me Herr, he said, his voice lowering a tone and becoming more intimate. Call me Maximilian. I think that after today we have moved beyond the stage of formalities. They remained silent for a moment. Maximilian handed her a glass of water and helped her drink, gently holding her head. The physical contact between them was electric, charged with a new tension that had nothing to do with the boss-employee relationship. Rest, he said, sitting back down. I'll stay here tonight. It's not necessary. You'll be uncomfortable. I'm not moving, Maximilian declared, crossing his arms and settling into the armchair. Sleep, Lena. Tomorrow we begin a new life. Lena looked at him and for the first time allowed herself to feel something more than gratitude. She felt protected. She felt seen. She closed her eyes and sleep overtook her almost instantly, but this time without nightmares. While she slept, Maximilian took out his phone and opened the gallery. He looked at a photo he had taken hours earlier, the twins hugging Lena in the garden. Then he looked at the real woman in the bed. Victoria wanted a wedding, Maximilian thought. But Lena deserves the whole world. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Society would talk. His late wife's family might object. But looking at Lena's hand resting on the white sheet, Maximilian von Hohenstein knew he was prepared to fight anyone. He was falling in love, and this time it was for real. But the peace of the hospital was only an interlude. Maximilian had neutralized Victoria, but he had forgotten a loose end, a very dangerous loose end, that came from his children's past and was about to come knocking with a lawsuit under the arm. The twins' maternal family, absent for years, had smelled blood and money after the scandal of Victoria's arrest, and were willing to use Lena's humble origins to take away from Maximilian what he loved most. The days in the hospital passed in a strange and revealing time bubble for Maximilian von Hohenstein. The man who used to measure his life in board meetings and stock market fluctuations now measured the hours by the frequency of Lena's smiles and the hemoglobin reports the doctor gave him each morning. Maximilian had canceled his entire schedule for the first time in 10 years. Family emergency, he told his secretary, and he wasn't lying because there in that sterile room of the private clinic was what he was beginning to consider his true family. The transformation was subtle but profound. The first afternoon that the doctors allowed the children to visit, the entire hospital seemed to stop. Maximilian had sent his driver to pick up Lucas and Finn, and when the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, the silence of the corridors was broken. Not with rude shouts, but with the pure joy of 2 children who were getting their world back. Lulu! The unison scream echoed as the little ones ran down the wax corridor, ignoring the nurse's stares. Maximilian, who was sitting by the bed reading emails on his tablet, jumped up to intercept them before they hit the bed. Hey, champions, slow down, he warned them, crouching down to gently slow them down. Lulu is still weak. We have to be gentlemen. What happened next left Maximilian breathless. Lena, who had been dozing, sat up with an energy she shouldn't have had. Her eyes lit up with a light that erased any trace of illness. She stretched out her arms, and the children, obeying their father, approached with touching care, climbing onto the bed to snuggle up beside her without hurting her. My brave boys, she whispered, kissing their blonde heads, inhaling their scent as if it were oxygen. Have you been good to Papa? Yes, exclaimed Finn. Papa let us eat ice cream for dessert and read us the story of the dragon, but he doesn't do the voices like you. Lucas accused with brutal innocence. Maximilian burst out laughing, a frank sound that surprised even him. Lena looked at him over the children's heads and their eyes met. In that silent exchange there was a shared intimacy, a secret of upbringing, a complicity that Maximilian had never had with Victoria, not even with Elena in the final days of his marriage. He realized that Lena not only took care of his children, she knew them. She knew their fears, their tastes, their rhythms. She was the architect of his happiness, and he had been about to fire her. During the following week, Maximilian discovered much more. During the long hours of conversation while the children were at school or sleeping at home, Lena spoke to him about her life, not with complaints, but with a dignity that disarmed him. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher, which were interrupted by her mother's illness. She told him about how she learned to read stories with intonation to entertain the children at the public hospital where her mother was receiving treatment. "Children don't need expensive toys, Maximilian," she told him one afternoon, while he was cutting her fruit for her afternoon snack, a gesture of service that he performed clumsily, but with devotion. "They need to be seen, to be heard. They need to know that if they fall, there are hands ready to catch them." Every word she spoke was a lesson that pierced the millionaire's heart. Maximilian began to see his own mansion and his fortune not as an end, but as a means to protect that light. When she was finally discharged, Maximilian did not allow anyone else to take her. He drove the car himself with Lena in the passenger seat and the children singing in the back seats. The return to the Gut Lindenhof was triumphant. The staff who had lived under Victoria's silent tyranny and who knew Lena's kindness welcomed her at the entrance. There was no formal party, but there were genuine smiles, fresh flowers in her room, which Maximilian had ordered to be moved to a guest suite on the main floor, away from the maids' quarters and close to the children, and a feeling that the air in the house was lighter. That first night at home marked the point of no return. After putting the children to bed, a task they did together with Maximilian, learning to do the dragon's voices under Lena's cheerful direction, they both went down to the kitchen for tea. The house was silent. Moonlight streamed through the windows. Lena leaned against the marble island, holding the hot cup in her hands. She was no longer wearing the uniform. Maximilian had insisted that they burn those blue suits. She was now wearing comfortable pants and a simple blouse that a stylist had brought at his request. She looked beautiful, not like an employee, but like the woman she was. "Thank you," she said, breaking the silence. "Not just because of the hospital or my mother. Thank you for defending me that day. No one had ever done anything like that for me." Maximilian moved closer. The distance between them shrank to centimeters. He could smell her soap, something soft and clean. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he replied, his voice husky. "You gave me back my children, Lena, and I think you're giving me back myself." Lena looked up, and the air crackled with electricity. Maximilian felt an irresistible urge to kiss her. He wanted to erase the years of loneliness. He wanted to seal the unspoken pact that they were now a team. He reached up to caress her cheek, and she didn't pull away. Her eyes closed in anticipation, her lips parted slightly, but just as he leaned in, the sound of a telephone broke the magic. It was the house landline, a line that only rang for emergencies or serious family matters. Maximilian stopped, frustrated, but his protective instinct kicked in. "I have to answer this," he murmured, reluctantly walking away. Lena nodded, blushing, touching her cheek where he had almost touched her. Maximilian picked up the receiver in the hallway. "Yes, Herr von Hohenstein." It was the voice of the security guard at the main gate, tense and worried. "I know it's late, but there's a vehicle at the entrance. They're insisting on coming in. They say they're family." Maximilian frowned. "What family? I'm not expecting anyone." "It's Gräfin Bernarda von Falken, sir, the children's grandmother, and she's with a lawyer." Maximilian felt his blood run cold. Bernarda, Elena's mother, hadn't seen her grandchildren in 3 years, claiming it hurt too much to see them because they reminded her of her dead daughter. What was she doing there at 10 p.m. without warning? "Don't let them in," Maximilian began. But then he heard the sound of a powerful engine approaching along the private road. They had forced their way in, or the guard hadn't been able to stop them. He hung up the phone violently. "Lena," he said, returning to the kitchen, his face contorted with tension. "Go to your room. Close the door. Don't come out for anything." "Maximilian, what's wrong?" she asked, alarmed by the drastic change in his demeanor. "The past," he said, as the beams of powerful headlights swept across the living room walls through the windows. "They've just arrived at our door, and they didn't come in peace." The sound of the front door opening without knocking was a declaration of war. Maximilian stood in the middle of the hallway, arms crossed, a human wall between the intruders and the inside of his home. A man in a gray suit entered first, carrying a leather briefcase and looking around with an air of self-importance. Behind him came Gräfin Bernarda von Falken. Even at her advanced age, she was still an imposing woman, wearing a fur coat despite the mild weather, and with that perpetual expression of displeasure that Maximilian remembered all too well. Behind her, to Maximilian's surprise and horror, came Victoria. Victoria didn't look like the defeated woman the police had taken away weeks before. She was dressed in somber black, like a grieving widow, with dark glasses, which she removed upon entering to reveal made-up eyes, to appear sad but gleaming with malice. "Guten Abend, Maximilian," Bernarda said, her voice as cold as dry ice. She didn't look at her son-in-law. She looked at the house as if she were appraising a property for auction. "I see you've turned my daughter's home into a hotel for domestic staff." "Bernarda," Maximilian greeted, ignoring the poisonous barb. "To what do I owe the honor of this midnight intrusion? And more importantly, what is this criminal doing in my house?" He pointed at Victoria. Victoria made an offended gesture and hid behind Bernarda. "Don't speak to her like that," Bernarda snapped. "Victoria has had the courage to seek me out and tell me the truth. She has opened my eyes to the hell my grandchildren are living through." "Hell?" Maximilian let out an incredulous laugh. "Your grandchildren are happy for the first time since Lena died. If you had come to see them once in the last 3 years, you would know it." "Don't you dare judge my grief," Bernarda shouted, striking the ground with her cane. "I lost a daughter, but I'm not going to lose my grandchildren. I will not allow them to be raised by just any woman, an illiterate servant you have put in my daughter's bed." The insult echoed off the stone walls. Maximilian took a threatening step forward. "Wash your mouth out before you talk about her. Lena is more of a lady than you, or Victoria will be in 10 lifetimes. "Ah, so you admit it," the lawyer interjected, opening his briefcase with a sharp click. "He admits to having a romantic relationship with the employee in charge of the children. That's very interesting for the judge." "What are you talking about?" Maximilian growled. "Herr von Hohenstein," the lawyer said, handing him a thick manila envelope. "This is a court summons for a full custody petition. Gräfin Bernarda von Falken is requesting immediate guardianship of the minors Lucas and Finn von Hohenstein, alleging a morally inappropriate environment, parental neglect, and exposure to psychological risks." Maximilian snatched the envelope from the lawyer's hands and tore it open, scattering the pieces on the floor. "They're crazy. No judge will grant them custody. I'm their father. I have no criminal record. I have means." "Yes," Victoria hissed, taking a step forward with a venomous smile. "But you also have a pending trial. Or do you think I've been sitting idly by? I've testified that you manipulated the videos, that you set me up to cover up your affair with the nanny. And guess what? The press loves it. Tomorrow, the millionaire and the maid, the plot to destroy the fiancée, will be all over the front pages of society. And there's more. We have proof that this woman, Lena Fernandez, has a family history of instability," Bernarda added. "Her mother is ill, isn't she? Cancer, exorbitant medical expenses. It's obvious she approached you and the children for money. It's a family of fortune hunters, Maximilian, and you've fallen into their trap like a dirty old man." "Enough," the voice came from the stairs. Everyone turned their heads. Lena was there. She hadn't stayed in her room. She was standing on the first step, pale and trembling, but with her head held high. She had heard everything, the insults, the threat to take the children away. "Don't speak of what you don't know, Gräfin," Lena said, slowly descending the stairs. Her legs were weak, but her will was iron. "I don't want Maximilian's money, and if you love your grandchildren, you should be glad they're not crying at night anymore." Bernarda looked at her with utter contempt, scanning her from head to toe. "You are the intruder," she asked with disgust. "Look at yourself. You're nothing special. Do you think you can replace my daughter? Do you think you can educate the von Hohenstein heirs with your low-class upbringing?" "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Lena replied, entering the lobby and standing next to Maximilian. Instinctively, Maximilian took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in front of everyone, a gesture of supreme defiance. I'm just trying to give them love, something that seems to be sorely lacking in this family, apart from their father. Insolent! Bernarda raised her hand to slap her. Maximilian intercepted his mother-in-law's hand midair, stopping it firmly but gently. Don't even think about it, Maximilian said in a voice so low and dangerous that the lawyer took 2 steps back. You touch a hair on this woman's head, Bernarda, and I swear I'll forget you're the grandmother of my children. Bernarda withdrew her hand, trembling with rage. She looked at Maximilian and Lena's clasped hands. Fine, the old woman said, regaining her composure. I wanted to do this the right way, for Elena's memory, but I see you've chosen the trash. We'll meet in court, Maximilian, and I'm warning you, I have very powerful friends, judges, politicians. You're not going to win. I'm going to take the children away from you, and when I do, I'll make sure this little woman ends up where she belongs, cleaning latrines in jail. Go, Maximilian ordered, pointing to the door. Get out of my house. Before leaving, Victoria stopped in front of Lena and whispered, Enjoy it while it lasts, darling, because when they take those children away, Maximilian will hate you. He'll blame you. In the end, the weakest link always breaks. The door closed behind them, leaving a deathly silence in the hallway, but this time it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of fear. Lena let go of Maximilian's hand and put her hands to her face, bursting into tears. You're right, she sobbed. You're right, Maximilian. I'm a problem. If I leave now, they'll leave you alone. They won't take the children away. No, Maximilian grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. That's what they want. They want to divide us. Listen to me, Lena. You're not going anywhere. But they're powerful. They said they have judges, and I'm nobody. You're everything, Maximilian said fiercely, and I have something they don't. I have the truth, and I have enough money to buy my own justice if necessary. But they can take Lucas and Finn away from you. Lena's voice broke. I would die if they separated them from you because of me. It's not going to happen, I promise you. But we have to be smart, and we have to be quick. Maximilian walked toward his office, his mind racing. We're getting married tomorrow. What? Lena froze in the middle of the room. Maximilian turned around. It wasn't a romantic proposal, it was a war strategy, but his eyes shone with something else. If we get married, you're no longer the employee. You're my wife. You're the children's legal stepmother. Their argument about an immoral environment crumbles. If you're my wife, you have rights, and no one, not Bernarda, not the Pope, can say you're a stranger in this house. Lena stared at him, stunned. Marry for the papers? Maximilian approached her again, and this time tenderness broke through his facade of a general battling for the papers. Yes, for the judge. But he stroked her face, drying her tears. After these days, after seeing how you love my children and how you've taken care of me, I can't think of anyone I'd rather be entrenched with in this war. Would you do it? Would you marry me to save our family? The question hung in the air. It was madness. It was rash. But when Lena thought of Lucas and Finn, and when she looked into Maximilian's desperate and hopeful eyes, she knew the answer had been given in her heart long before that night. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Maximilian embraced her, an embrace that sealed their shared destiny, but they didn't know that Bernarda wasn't going to wait for the trial. She had an ace up her sleeve, a secret from Lena's past that not even Maximilian knew, and that was about to explode in court in the cruelest way possible. The final battle was on. The sound of the judge's gavel striking the bench echoed like a gunshot in the packed family courtroom of the Amtsgericht. The air was so thick with tension that it was hard to breathe. On one side, Gräfin Bernarda von Falken and Victoria, dressed in their finest designer suits, wore smug smiles, certain of their victory. On the other side, Maximilian, impeccable in his dark suit, but with visible dark circles under all his eyes, held Lena's hand under the table. She trembled, not from the cold, but from pure terror, from losing the children she loved as if she had given birth to them. Order in the court, bellowed the Richter, an older man with a stern face and thick-framed glasses. The plaintiff. It was her turn to present her final argument. Bernarda's lawyer, a man with a reputation as a shark, stood up, straightening his tie. He walked slowly to the center of the room, holding an old yellow document as if it were a lethal weapon. He spun around and pointed an accusing finger at Lena. "Your Honor," he began in a theatrical voice, "Herr von Hohenstein has tried to paint an idyllic picture of this woman. He has spoken to us of her maternal instincts, of her kindness, but he has omitted a crucial detail. A detail that proves that leaving two defenseless minors in her care is criminal negligence." The lawyer paused dramatically, looking at the press gathered at the back of the room. "Fräulein Lena Fernandez has a criminal record. At the age of 16, she spent 6 months in a juvenile detention center for aggravated assault with a bladed weapon." A murmur of horror rippled through the room. Maximilian tensed, turning his head sharply toward Lena. She closed her eyes, lowering her head as tears began to fall. She hadn't denied it. It was true. Bernarda let out a cruel little laugh, covering her mouth with a lace handkerchief. "Is that the kind of mother your Honor wants for your grandchildren?" the implacable lawyer continued. "A violent woman, an ex-convict who attacked a man with a kitchen knife. We request immediate and full custody for the maternal grandmother and a permanent restraining order against this criminal." The judge looked at Lena over his glasses. "Fräulein Fernandez, is this true?" Maximilian tried to stand up to defend her, to shout that it was all in the past, but Lena squeezed his hand and stood up on her own. It was the moment, her moment. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and lifted her chin, meeting the judge's gaze with a dignity that silenced the entire courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor," Lena said, her voice clear, though trembling. "It's true, I was locked up." Victoria let out a victorious "ha," but Lena didn't stop. "I was 16 years old. The man I attacked was my stepfather. I came home from school and found him slamming my mother against the kitchen floor. He was killing her, Your Honor. He was a big man, and I was just a child. I grabbed the only thing I could reach to make him let her go. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted my mother to keep breathing." The silence in the courtroom shifted. It was no longer a silence of outrage, but one of shock. "I accepted my sentence," Lena continued, staring at Bernarda, who for the first time seemed uncomfortable. "I went to the reformatory and finished my studies there with honors. I worked double shifts from the time I left to pay for the treatment of that same mother I defended. I am not a criminal, Your Honor. I am a daughter. And if anyone tried to hurt Lucas or Finn, I would do it again. I would use my hands, my teeth, and my entire life to protect them, because that's what a mother does. Defend." Maximilian felt his heart burst with pride. He stood up next to her. "Your Honor," Maximilian interjected in a firm voice. 2 weeks ago, I married Lena Fernandez in a private civil ceremony. She's not the nanny, she's my wife. She's the legal mother of my children. And that violent instinct the prosecution speaks of is the same instinct that has saved my children from the depression and emotional neglect they were living in, thanks in part to the negligence of these two women." "I protest," Bernarda's lawyer shouted. "This is irrelevant." "No, it isn't," the judge interrupted, looking at Maximilian. "Please continue, Herr von Hohenstein." Maximilian took a pen drive out of his pocket. "They talk about violence. They talk about danger. I would like to present as evidence the security videos from my home recorded during the time that Fräulein Victoria was in charge of my children." Victoria's face fell. She tried to get up to leave, but a bailiff blocked her way. The judge allowed the reproduction. The unfiltered truth was seen on the giant screens in the room. Victoria was seen pinching Lucas until he cried. Victoria was seen yelling at them, pushing them, calling them nuisances. The coldness, the contempt, the psychological cruelty were seen, and then the videos of Lena hugging them, teaching them to read, healing their wounds, dancing with them were seen. The contrast was so brutal that even Bernarda's lawyer lowered his gaze in shame. When the video ended, the room was in deathly silence. Gräfin Bernarda von Falken was pale, looking at Victoria with hatred, realizing that her ally had been her downfall. "I didn't know," stammered the grandmother. "She told me that the children were impossible." The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired but determined. I've seen enough. In my 30-year career, I've seen many custody cases, but rarely such clear evidence of who is the villain and who is the hero in a child's life. He struck the gavel only once. The custody request of Gräfin Bernarda von Falken is denied. Full and exclusive custody is maintained for Father Maximilian von Hohenstein. Furthermore, given the content of the tapes, this court orders an investigation to be opened ex officio against Fräulein Victoria for domestic child abuse. "No, they won't allow me to leave the building," Victoria screamed as two officers grabbed her arms. "No, Maximilian, help me. You can't let them do this to me." Maximilian didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on Lena, who was crying with relief while clinging to him. Bernarda left the room hurriedly, humiliated, without looking back, abandoning her accomplice to her fate. Good had won. 3 hours later, the afternoon sun bathed the Gut Lindenhof in a warm golden light, very different from the cold light of that day when it all began. The Schwartz Mercedes S-Class entered slowly along the gravel road. In the back seat, Lucas and Finn, who had been waiting with Maria, were sleeping peacefully, exhausted from the excitement of the reunion. Maximilian stopped the car in front of the main entrance, but did not get out immediately. He turned towards Lena. She stared at the facade of the house, her house, with an expression of disbelief. "Is it over?" she whispered. "The fear is over," Maximilian replied. "Now life begins." They got out of the car. Maria went out to greet the sleeping children and take them to their beds. Maximilian took Lena's hand, and instead of going into the house, he led her towards the garden. They walked across the freshly cut grass until they reached the exact spot near the stone fountain where he had seen her dancing with the children that first day. Lena looked around. The wind gently moved the rose bushes. Everything was peaceful. "This is where I fell in love with you," Maximilian said suddenly. Lena turned around, surprised. "But you were furious that day. You were planning to fire me." "I came to say goodbye, but I saw you. I saw my children running towards you. I saw your yellow gloves stained with dirt, and I knew, though my businessman brain took a while to process it, that I was seeing the most valuable thing that would ever enter this property." Maximilian put his hand in his jacket pocket. "We got married in a civil ceremony, quickly, with a friendly judge to win a legal battle," he said, taking another step closer. "It was a contract, a strategy, but I don't want my marriage to be a strategy, Lena. I want it to be a promise." He knelt there on the same ground where she used to kneel to clean her play, the richest man in the region, kneeling without caring about staining his pants worth thousands of euros. He took out a blue velvet box. "Lena Fernandez, brave woman, mother at heart to my children, savior of my soul. Would you do me the immense honor of becoming my wife, not before a judge, but before God and before ourselves? Do you really want to build this home with me forever?" Lena put her hands to her mouth and opened the box. It wasn't a flashy, cold diamond like the one Victoria had demanded. It was a beautiful, delicate ring with a bright yellow central diamond, as brilliant as the sun, surrounded by small white diamonds. "Yellow," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "Like the gloves," Maximilian said, his eyes moist. "Like the light you brought into this dark house." "Yes," Lena replied, and her voice rang out loud and clear in the garden. "Yes, Maximilian, 1,000 times yes." Maximilian slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit her perfectly. He stood up and kissed her. It was a long, deep kiss, sealed with the relief of victory and the promise of a bright future. From the second-floor window, two blonde faces pressed against the glass watched the scene. "Papa is kissing Lulu," Lucas laughed. "How disgusting," said Finn, but he was also laughing. "Now Lulu is going to stay forever." Down in the garden, the millionaire and the former employee broke their kiss and hugged, looking towards the house. It was no longer a cold mansion filled with sad echoes. It was a home. And as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and violet, Maximilian knew he had closed the best deal of his life. He hadn't won millions, he had won a family.